Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Death Guard Noxious Blightbringer. So the first colour we're going to use on this guy is going to be Flames of War Russian Uniform World War II, which is one of the Vallejo colours. If you haven't got this, then any kind of olive drab will do. Vallejo olive drab is a really good green. If you only got the Citadel range, probably something similar to maybe Elysian green would work fine too. I think the Elysian green might be slightly lighter than this, but it gives a similar kind of olive drab to it. Using this on the shoulder pads, one of the knee pads, and his robes. You can see there. Next up we're going to use Vallejo Model Air Rust. We're looking at this, any kind of like maybe Rune Lord Brass from Citadel would work quite well for this too. I'm going to use this to colour in the bells, the trim of his armour, and any of the little fly icons that are on there. Also the incense balls which are swinging from the chains around him. Paint the main body of them with the holes in with this colour too. I'm going to be using a different colour to do the trim on all this stuff. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Leadbelcher. This is going to be for the chains and the body of the plasma pistol and the spikes. As I say, the trim on the bell and also the shaft of the bell he's got in his left hand. Once you've finished that, we can move on to Citadel Rakarth Flesh, which we're going to use to do all of the bone. So you've got these bone spurs growing out of his power pack, one out of his shoulder, one out of the nurgling's head too. There's a great miniature of this. I painted one originally when Dark Imperium came out, but didn't actually make a video or anything like that with him. One of my pals, Chris, passed me some of the Death Guard miniatures that he didn't want, and this was one of them, so I thought, paint it up. He's one of the few that aren't there. So cheers for that, Chris. The next colour that's coming up is Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to use this to do all of the flesh parts, so these are the bits that are going to be poking out between the armour, around his feet. There's also on his back, on his right hand side, just between his back and the power pack, there's a big fleshy mass that's growing out the side of him there. So we're painting that with it too. And then the tubes that are coming down from around his neck, around his head, going to be painting them too. Now a little bit of nurgling green, which we're going to paint the nurgling with. I'm applying most of these colours with a bit of an old battered Citadel medium layer brush here. Because it means I can apply the colours quickly. It holds its shape reasonably well, but it's quite a blunt end, so if I'm jabbing it into any gaps or anything like that, or being a bit rough with it, it doesn't really matter too much because I'm not trying to hold the point anymore. But once you've finished greening up that nurgling, we can move on to the next colour. Next one is going to be Citadel Dorn Yellow. And we're going to go around and we're going to paint all of the pustules and boils on the miniature. Now there is quite a few, and as I go through I will spot ones that I've missed on this layer. But this is a good idea to paint them now, and then you can kind of see where you're trying to avoid getting some of the other shades, and you know where those pustules are. There's quite a few on his back and on some of the tubes, and those growthy bits down by his feet too. Next, Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to use this to do the plasma coils on his plasma pistol, and also the mouth of the nurgling. There's not really too much gore on this guy, which is a shame. He's relatively sealed, doesn't have any open wounds to speak of. So there's just going to be a few little red bits and nothing too much really going on. So now I'm going to be using Citadel Xereus purple to paint the little tentacles that are grown out of him. There's a couple of them grown out of his right leg and his left leg holding bells. So I'm going to give them a nice smooth layer of purple. Apologies, this is slightly off camera this. It's basically any little tentacles. There's a couple under his arm too. I think one grown out somewhere near his hip as well. So give them a nice coat of Xereus purple, and we can move on to the next colour. So next up is going to be Citadel Moot green. I'm just going to use this to do a couple of little bits of slime, which are on either side of his helmet there. You've got a little bit on his shoulder going down to his forearm, and a little bit on the underside of that shoulder and forearm too. So once you've given this a quick coat of Moot green, go on to the next colour. Now I'm going to start with the shades. I'm going to use Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this on all of the green, also all of his armour, and all of the bone too. So this is one of the major ones that you're going to use on this miniature. It's the vast majority that you're going to do with this. So give that a good colour so that you get the shade in the recesses to bring out those details. If you saw the post on Instagram, you'll see what a difference these shades make when you're putting them onto the miniature after you put the base colours on. The difference is absolutely unreal. Next up, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to use this on all the Vallejo model rust, so all that bronzy colour. You want to give that a good coat of Agrax Earthshade, so you get all the shades in the recesses, darkening it down and dulling it down. Once you've got all the model rust done, we can move on to the next shade. Next shade is going to be Citadel Nuln Oil. You can use this on all of the bits that you painted with Citadel Leadbelcher. This is all the chains, the handle to that bell. You've got the plasma pistol and the little bits between his armour plates there. Once you've got the Nuln Oil out the way, we're going to move on to Citadel Biel-tan green. Just going to use that to shade the little bits of Moot green that we've put on there. I should also say there's a little bit on the inside of that bell that he's holding in his left hand there. There's some gunk inside there that you want to paint with Moot green, and then shade with Biel-tan green here too. I don't actually do that to the very end because I didn't spot it till the last part. Now I'm going to use Citadel Carroburg Crimson Shade just to paint the mouth of the nurgling and also the plasma coils on his plasma pistol. A very quick layer, that one. Next up, Citadel Athonian Camoshade. We are going to paint all of the skin, the Balor brown, and also all of the skin on the nurgling. The reason I use the Athonian Camoshade on the Balor brown for skin is because it gives it a really sickly, deathly kind of colour. So it does fit in quite well with the rest of them. Looking forward to the new Death Guard miniature, so hopefully I'll be able to paint that up soon. Not going to try and pronounce it because I have real difficulty pronouncing the Lord of. So I'm not even going to attempt it. I know what the word is, just can't say it. So moving back onto recolouring the miniature now, we're back onto the Vallejo Russian Uniform World War II from their Flames of War range. If you're using a different olive drab green, that's fine. Just going to reapply this to the shoulder pads and the cloth on his front there too. And also the knee, just to give that some of its basic colour back, making sure that you leave some of the sepia in the recesses, and also that'll give it that nice shade. We're going to add a little bit of Vallejo White to the Russian uniform World War II, and we're just going to start highlighting that as we go along. Now you want to be thinking about where the light is catching it now, as we're starting to do the highlights on it. So the light's going to be catching the top edges of all the ridges and things like that, and then when you've got like the holes in the cloth there, it's going to be getting the bottom edges of those holes. So you want to be making sure that the light is catching those to make them really stand out. Now we're going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. I'm going to start highlighting the cloth and the shoulder pads again. This time is a bit more of an extreme edge highlight, just to make those stand out a little bit more. Now it's going to be using a little bit of Citadel Ushabti bone mixed with Vallejo White, and this is to give the off-white colour that I use for the armour. I'm actually painting one of the hands there just off screen, so move him up so you can now see it, and we're just going to be reapplying this colour to the armour to give it that off-white colour that we use for my Death Guard. Kind of goes with the pallid hand too. If you have a colour similar to this, you probably won't need to mix it, but I've just always done this, so sticking to my old mix. Now going back onto the Vallejo brown, I'm going to start working on the skin again. But we are now working on the skin on the miniature. He's got that kind of tube hanging down behind the cloth on his front there. He's got all these growths on his feet and around the side of his power pack. He's also got some tubes coming out of his power pack too, so we're going to be working on those as well. We're going to add a little bit of Citadel Deepkin flesh to the Vallejo brown. I'm now going to start highlighting these tubes. Now on the feet there is some part of it where you can't really tell, or I can't really tell, whether it's lumps of fleshy skin and stuff poking out from underneath the armour or whether it's just some pustules. So whatever you work it as, you can paint them how you see fit when you come to do it. It's mainly on his right foot. There's just some little lumps and little spots poking out. Now I'm going to add a little bit more deepkin flesh to it, and I'm working on the bit between the power pack and the torso, which is bulging out and is quite horrific. It does look pretty grotty. A little bit off camera there, sorry about that. We're just continuing to highlight the fleshy tubes and the bits that are bulging out of his side. So now we're adding a little bit more Citadel Deepkin flesh to the mix. We're going to do one final highlight on those tubes, on the fleshy parts of him. Again, as with all highlights, you want to be thinking about where the light's catching it, making sure that you're highlighting the top edges of it, just so it looks like the light is catching them as it's coming down from above. Now we're going to start working on the nurgling with Citadel Nurgling Green. You want to reapply the base coat, leaving the Athonian Camoshade in the recesses, and also you want to leave the Athonian Camoshade on the undersides of him, so underneath his body, on the lower part of it, you want to make sure that that's still shaded, sort of like underneath his arms and that kind of thing. So anywhere where the light's not going to be catching it, leave the shade in there. Once you've reapplied this one, we can move on to the next colour. So now we're adding a little bit of Vallejo White to the nurgling green. I'm just going to start to highlight that. Now again, think about where the light's coming from above. You want to be highlighting the top edges and the tops of ridges where the light will be catching it more. Once you've got these highlights on, move on to the next colour. Now next we're mixing a little bit more white to the nurgling green. And this is going to be to do the final highlight, so you want to be doing those top edges once more. And annoyingly the light keeps flashing in and out there because I've failed to put the proper settings on the camera when it's recording, which does make the greens and the highlights look a little less smooth than they should do. However, if you do end up with it where it's not looking too hot, you can always go back and just use some of the previous layers just to smooth that out and get them so they're looking okay. So now I'm going to start working on all the pieces of bone and the bone spurs. I'm going to start off with Citadel Rakarth flesh and reapply the colour. You want to be making sure you're leaving the Seraphim Sepia in the recesses. There are some quite discreet little recesses and grooves in these bone spurs, so try and leave the Sepia in them just to make them stand out a little bit more. Once you've finished that, we can move on to the next colour. And for this we're going to be adding Citadel Ushabti bone to the Rakarth flesh, so we lighten that quite a little bit. You want to be thinking about where the light is going to be catching these bone spurs and where it's going to be catching the ridges, and making sure you're applying this highlight colour to those areas to make them stand out. So when you've got the kind of horizontal ridges and gaps within the spur, you want to make sure that you're highlighting them in the proper places to make it look like the light is coming down from above and catching it. Now I'm just going to use some pure Citadel Ushabti bone. This is going to be just to do the final highlight on all these bone parts. Once again, you want to be making sure that you're catching those ridges to make them stand out as though the light is catching them. Next up, Citadel Moot green. I'm just going to reapply the colour to these little bits of gloopy stuff which are down the side of his helmet and around his right arm that's holding the plasma gun. Doesn't seem to be too much anywhere else. I haven't been able to find anyone else on the model. But he's got a few little runs of it here and there. So just quickly add colour to them, making sure that you're leaving the Biel-tan green in the recesses. I'm going to add a little bit of white to the Moot green. I'm just going to do one quick little highlight to each of these parts. As I said earlier when we were doing the Biel-tan green, you want to do this to the little squidgy bits on the inside of that bell that he's holding in his left hand, because there is some stuff just inside that too. Like so. Now we're going to start working on all the pustules, so we're going to use Citadel Dorn yellow once again, and we're just going to recolour all of these. Make sure that they're nice and bright and a bit gloopy. So that any that you spotted on the way round when you paint up the rest of them, you want to make sure you catch them. Make sure you get all the ones all over the nurgling, all over the little fleshy bits that are grown out of the Noxious Blightbringer himself. Some on the bone spurs, some on those tubes, some on the tube which is hanging down behind the green cloth. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the plasma pistol. I'm going to start by reapplying the Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm using a Citadel small layer brush here, and we are just, so here you're seeing the downside of having a fixed focus when this comes back into view, and that's that when it's horizontal it's one level and it's in focus, and then when you turn the miniature it becomes out of focus. But as long as you're picking out each of those ridges with the Mephiston Red, you can't go wrong with that. If you do happen to get any Mephiston Red into any of the grooves and the recesses, you can just reapply some Carroburg Crimson and crack on. Now we're going to add some Citadel Fire Dragon Bright to the Mephiston Red, and we're going to start highlighting the coils on the plasma pistol. Like so. For the next layer, I'm going to add a little bit more Fire Dragon Bright to the previous mix. We're just going to start highlighting that again. As you can see here, there is quite a hideous mould line running right the way down the centre of that plasma coil, which is a bit horrible. But bear with it, it does vanish sometime here because I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. So do trim that off and then repaint the sections as we go. Now we're going to add a little bit more Fire Dragon Bright to the previous mix. I'm just going to pick out those coils once more. The idea is here that you want to have the darker colours towards the outside and the lighter colours towards the middle, as though the glow is coming from the middle of those coils. Again, a bit more Fire Dragon Bright to the previous mix. Mainly adding this straight down the middle of the coils. And finally, we're adding some white to the previous mix to really lighten up those coils. And here I'm just tidying up the edges of it using some of the previous layers and the previous highlights just to get them into the right place. This is just going to be some pure white just down the central part, and spread that slightly too wide. So again, using some of the previous highlight colours, we're just going to get that back so it's a little bit dark around those edges and the brightness isn't all the way around it. Like so. Now we're going to work on the tentacles. I'm just going to use a little bit of Genestealer purple to start highlighting these. I realised doing this part here that the tentacles, the Xereus purple, were washed with Citadel Druchii violet, but there isn't a section for that in the video, so you can either wash these with Citadel Druchii violet or you can just highlight them. It doesn't really matter too much because they're only very, very small and they're also in quite hard to see places. The only one you might want to think about washing if you can't be bothered doing that is the one underneath his power pack. And we're just going to highlight them once more with Citadel Pink Horror. It's just trying to pick out any details or ridges on them for the ones that aren't in the most awkward position conceivable. Like so. Now we're going to be working on the nurgling's face. We're going to start using a little bit of Vallejo White, this just to do his eyes and his teeth. Like so. Now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black just to put two little spots in his eyes there, and making him look a little bit to his right, or to the left of the screen. So he's almost looking at the Noxious Blightbringer. I'm trying to put the pupils in there. Now we're going to start doing some of the washes and things like that. We're going to start with Vallejo Red Wash. All we're doing here is going to use this to go around each of the pustules on the Death Guard's fleshy parts, so to speak. The good thing about this is that it's not as dark as Carroburg Crimson, so when you add it to the areas, it does sort of give it that sore and tender look without making it look inflamed and really, really red. And it doesn't contrast too badly against the skin colour, because you can still see the skin colour through it. So it's a really good one to use around any of those boils and pustules. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Seraphim Sepia. We're going to use this to do the streaks on his armour. So as always, if you imagine him standing with his arms by his sides, we're going to be doing the streaks as though they're running vertically downwards when he stood, arms by his sides and straight up. So try to think about that when you're adding the streaks to him. And you want to run them down from any ridges or features on the helmet, or any dents or anything like that in the armour, and also any ridges where grime could build up. Now we're going to use Citadel Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to do much the same as we've just done, but we're going to add less little streaks. So you're just doing a few smaller streaks in between the sepia ones here. Nothing too much at all, just to fill in some of those gaps and give the streaks a slightly different colour to them. Next up, Citadel Nuln Oil shade. I'm just going to do a final few little streaks with these. Nothing too major, just a few little diddy ones dotted about to give those streaks a little bit more colour and a little bit more variety. Like so. Now it's going to be Citadel Agrax Earthshade once more. I'm going to start adding this to the areas of Leadbelcher and Nuln Oil that we've already done. So his plasma pistol, all of the spikes and spines, the handle of the belt he's got in his left hand, the chains, that kind of thing. We're just going to discolour them with some Agrax Earthshade, just to give that some grime and a bit of dirty look to it. So it's going to be the base and the start off for some of the rust. I'll link up the rust tutorial here for you as well, which went up at the weekend, so if you haven't seen that, then that will give you a better idea of the way that I do some of the rust. So now using a little bit of Citadel Nihilak Oxide, we're going to put some verdigris on all of the bronze parts. So I tend to do this in areas that aren't going to be rubbed or brushed off too much. It's going to be in the recesses and around the bolts and that kind of thing. Now we're going to add some Seraphim Sepia, and this is going to go around the areas that you just put the Agrax Earthshade, and this gives it a kind of yellowy orange type colour and nice base for when we start doing the rust with the next layer. So we're going to add some of this around the areas where you just put the Agrax Earthshade. Like so. Now we're going to add some Citadel Typhus Corrosion, and this is going to be to rust up all those areas that we've just been touching up on with the Sepia and the Earthshade. So around the bases of the spikes above his helmet, on the braces that are going around the bell, those 3 spikes that are coming through the bone spine there, I completely rust all of those, just coat them with typhus corrosion so they're all lumpy and bumpy and there's no straight edges to them. But basically anywhere where you've got the Leadbelcher initially, we're going to start putting some rust on there. So using riser rust, I'm using a slightly old medium layer brush here. Get some of the riser rust on your brush, brush off the excess so there's a little bit left on, and then you're gently brushing that over the typhus corrosion once it's dry, and that will highlight it and give it that orange tint that you want to make it look like it's rusty. Now, one thing to be aware of with this is if you put too much on, it will be a really bright orange and it will stand out and make it look a bit unrusty. But if you go over it with almost like a dry brush, that will make it stand out and you'll also have the uneven rust colour and texture. So here I'm just using a spot of Citadel Carroburg Crimson Shade, and this is just for all of the little wounds and pockmarks on the nurgling and on the flesh of the Noxious Blightbringer, and just doing a little vertical run from each of them. With this layer finished, that is the completed Noxious Blightbringer. That is the Noxious Blightbringer. It's a great miniature with tons of great details, not too much gore. Here's mainly just details about his person. Plenty of options to do rust and techniques like that, so really good fun to paint. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you liked the video and you enjoyed the channel and you'd like to support us, you can head to our coffee page linked below where you can buy us a brew. Thanks very much.